Our top story this afternoon, at least 12 U.S. service members were killed in the attack today at Kabul's airport. 15 others are wounded. A number of Afghans are also dead or injured, as many as 60. Canada's Department of National Defence says no Canadian service members were hurt, but it's not yet known if any Canadian civilians were affected. I also just want to let you know that we are hearing that U.S. President Joe Biden will speak at 5 Eastern, so that is just over an hour from now. We will bring that to you. For more, let's return to Washington and connect with Megan Myers. She is the Pentagon Bureau Chief for Military Times. So, Megan, we carried that military briefing a little earlier this hour. You were watching. What stood out to you?
There were a lot of good details from General McKenzie about what happened, at least at the Abbey Gate, not so much at the Barron Hotel across the street, but essentially an ISIS-believed suicide bomber who was going through security screening, ostensibly to get onto the airport, detonated a suicide bomb. There were at least 11 Marines killed in the attack and 1 Navy corpsman, which is a medic, and then the count right now is another 15 injured service members.
General McKenzie talked about real threats in and around Kabul. Given that the drawdown currently underway, how well positioned is the U.S. military in defending it?
So we had got some reports from on the ground this morning that they had welded the gates shut at Hamid Karzai International in order to keep anybody else from trying to get onto the airfield. General McKenzie said, the things that they're concerned about most are attacks directly outside the airport, which is why they've locked things down, told people to leave as soon as they can. But also in case of mortar attacks, rockets coming over the wall, they have defense systems for that. They also have attack helicopters and drones out over Kabul looking for any threats ahead of time, and aircraft that are able to subdue those threats before they happen.
What makes the kind of withdrawal we've seen in recent weeks so complex and difficult in terms of a maneuver? A fighting withdrawal, I think, is what it's called. Can you tell us about that?
So you've heard a lot of leaders talk about a tenuous negotiation that we have going on with the Taliban right now. We told them last year we would leave by May 1st. President Biden extended that to the end of August. And so now we are relying on the Taliban to let us get out. And so far that has gone, in some ways well and in some ways not well. The Taliban has been helping with checkpoints outside of the airport. There have been reports of people who have not been able to get through those checkpoints, but also people who have 100,000 at this point, people who have. So the concern is that the Taliban is obviously not our friend here, right? And so we're in a very tenuous negotiation with them. But our common enemy in Afghanistan is ISIS, and that is the source of the attacks that we're seeing today. So we can't negotiate with ISIS. They're not interested in negotiating. And so that's a wild card that they've always known that they were going to have to deal with. And today is the day that it showed up.
And then let's talk a little bit about, the general was talking about the physical screening that takes place at this gate, at this opening to the airport. Tell us more about that.
So he described it as, Marines having to put hands on people to physically search them when they come in, but also being breath to breath, being face to face, being that close to each other. And that is a situation where someone like a suicide bomber can get very close, obviously. So they have to, kind of weigh the balance of getting as many people out as possible, but also having to make sure that these people are not trying to do any harm and, God forbid, get onto the airfield and be able to attack an airplane or other groups of civilians who are sitting there waiting to board.
Megan, thank you. That is Megan Myers, the Pentagon Bureau Chief for the Military Times. Canada has officially ended its rescue mission in Afghanistan. Officials say the last flight carrying people fleeing the Taliban out of Kabul left earlier today, and they know many citizens, permanent residents, and their families have been left behind. The CBC's Sarah Galashan has been following the story for us. So, Sarah, what is going to happen now with Canada's operation?
Well, Andrew, it is at this point over in terms of the rescue operation, and it did appear at the earlier press conference today to be as hard for the acting chief of defense staff to say those words as it was for so many Canadians and Afghans, certainly to hear them said. What we were told is that Canada was one of the last countries to exit or to leave and end their part in the rescue mission, that a small contingent of Canadians does remain on the ground to assist the U.S., which is going to be the last country, of course, as part of this rescue operation. The Canada's last flight out was a CF-17 carrying about 500, with another 500 spots secured by Canada on board an American aircraft. Both of those taking off really just hours before those two suicide bombs took place, one at the airport and one at the nearby hotel. The rescue mission was described, since the Taliban, of course, took Kabul, as being one of the largest, most complex and dangerous that has ever taken place. And that security situation, along with the U.S. deadline of August 31st, really, we were told, just made the decision on the part of Canada for Canada. It had to happen, that the mission did, this rescue mission did have to end. The exact number of Canadians that exact number that Canada managed to secure exit for is not yet confirmed. There is an estimate that was given, and that's 3,700. Among them, we were told, a young mother who had given birth just 15 hours prior, cared for by Canadian military troops, taken aboard and exited to Canada safely, as well a young boy who saw a Canadian soldier, really took to that soldier, and that soldier caring for the young boy as he made his way to Canada, because that soldier had a son that exact age back in Canada. And the general wanting to share those stories and try and focus on some of the success of the evacuation, but at the same time acknowledging the heartbreak and grief felt by the Canadian troops who have had now to leave without being able to take all of those who had secured Canadian papers to also go. But they know they have left people behind. This is what the general said about that.
They have witnessed horrific things. They have faced incredible dangers. And the feeling of helplessness and guilt that arises from having to leave people behind can be overwhelming. You know, I have received emails from people I worked with during my tours in Afghanistan who are desperate to get out or get their families out. Their pleas and the photos of the families in terrible situations that accompany many of them are heart-wrenching. They tear at our souls.
And Sarah, what are you hearing about the people who didn't make it out of Kabul?
Well, we were told that Canada received applications for about 8,000 people and that 2/3 of those were processed. There's no tally on exactly how many people have been stranded. The hope is that some of them have found exit to perhaps other countries on board other aircraft and just have not been accounted for, or have managed to flee by car or by foot to neighboring countries. Like many Canadian journalists, though, who have spent time in Afghanistan, I can say that I do personally know of a military contractor who worked both with Canada and the U.S. at Camp Julian and the Kandahar airfield for 4 years, who remains in Kabul, has secured the papers, but has been unable to get out because the situation is too dangerous for him, his wife, and his 6 children. He and others, of course, has spent time working alongside the Canadians and allied forces for decades. And the general did talk about the decades spent working alongside local Afghans and the efforts that Canada has made and the lives spent in Afghanistan over the years, and acknowledging that given the current situation, there are questions being asked about whether that was worth it. And I think on a day like today, it's worth playing that clip. I'm sorry, we don't.
Events of recent weeks have, not surprisingly, caused many of us to ask about our past involvement in Afghanistan. You know, was it worth it? You know, my personal answer is time will tell. You know, I know we made a difference in thousands of lives while we were there. And every one of those lives counts as a win. We'll see if that's enough.
And Andrew, I don't share that story about the military contractor to in any way suggest that troops on the ground, have failed. There are people who have been left behind. I think it's just important to share as many of those stories as we can right now, so that they stay in our minds as we watch what's going to unfold in Afghanistan in the coming weeks and months.
All right, Sarah, thank you.